Welcome to this FAME online event. And Amish, so good to see you. So good to see you again.
Pleasure seeing you too, my friend.
Yeah. So let me just start off with when you first started. It was a strange thing. I know you invited me to inaugurate your book called The Immortals of Melua. And I saw the cover, and of course, it's a book on Shiva. And there must have been many, many books written uh, on, Indian mythology. So I came not knowing what to expect. The first thing I saw was the lines and the queues outside the bookshop. And I thought, oh, this looked more like a movie premiere for me rather than a book launch, which is not very big in India ever. And then I noticed that they were all young. They were like college students. Like, what are they doing going for for a book that is about Shiva? And, they were like in those ripped jeans and, young girls and young boys. And that was the first thing I noticed. And then, of course, I came to launch, I met you. And then you started, even at the end of it, you started a chant. Was it Bam Bam Bole? What was it? What did
Yeah,
you
Har
say?
Har Mahadev.
Har Har Mahadev. And you said Har Har Mahadev. And I look back at this packed bookshop, packed full of young, early 20s and maybe slightly older sometime. And as you said it, they said Har Har Mahadev. Now, this is not the kind of crowd that I would have said. They're more like the crowd that goes to clubs, and they're very modern. And I remember coming out of that and then writing about it. And I said, oh my God, Amish Tripathi is India's first literary pop star. Tell me a little bit about how that happened. What did you expect when you first wrote it? Was that you couldn't have expected suddenly all the young people to get up and then want to read and buy the book?
Yeah, no, Shekhar, I mean, life has almost been like a dream. So I keep telling people, don't wake me up. um, and for those who are not Indians, they may not know this. Lord Shiva is an Indian god. And the Indian way of life is very different from the Western and Middle Eastern paradigm. And imagine if the worshippers of Thor and Apollo and Zeus and Amun-Ra were still alive. That's what India is. And in fact, Thor, Apollo, Zeus, and Amun-Ra were actually the young gods. Compared to, I mean, Lord Shiva has been worshipped from maybe 8,000, 9,000 years ago, right? These are really ancient. The mother goddess, I mean, India is the last surviving culture which still worships, among the last surviving, and certainly the last surviving major culture that still worships the mother goddess. These are very, very ancient traditions. In the Western paradigm, perhaps we're among the last pagan cultures to still be alive. Vikings is such a big hit in the West today. Vikings are only 1,300 years old, and the invasions of the UK. India is a lot older. And what you said so rightly, Shekhar, is actually in the modern day with this trend of westernization. And modernization often ends up equaling to westernization. Many of the youngsters actually moved away from this, and it was almost uncool to talk about our ancient traditions. This is one of the reasons my books were rejected by every publisher it was sent to. That first book, Immortals of Melua, which would come to, was self-published. I self-published my first book. It took off in the first week itself, and then within 3-4 months, many of the publishers who rejected it, came back to bid for it. And actually, I think the reasons that were given to me by publishers of why my book would be a guaranteed, and this was 12 years ago, right? My first book, 12, 13 years ago, 2010. My The reasons that the publishers gave for why my first book was a guaranteed flop were the exact same reasons why I think they actually became such huge hits. Uh, because they said that, look, you're talking about philosophies, you're talking about traditions, the youngsters aren't really interested in this, you know. Then they said that you're giving a very modern, liberal interpretation to what are very traditional stories. So the older traditional people will also not like it because they may feel offended. So I was told you offended every single reader segment possible, right? With this, you're showing goddesses as not as demure and submissive. You're showing them as strong and almost as warriors, right? You're showing LGBT characters and you're offending every single person. And yet you're being very traditional. And actually, that's the thing that I learned. Indian traditions are themselves actually very liberal. They're deeply liberal. It's just that we've forgotten many of our ancient stories. And I think that's a very reason why the youngsters in India like my stories, because they feel a sense of rootedness, because they're deeply linked to our traditions, to the gods that we worship, to the goddesses that we worship. And yet they are very liberal and modern. They're respectful of women's rights, respectful of LGBT rights, anti-caste, uh, which is actually in closer alignment to our traditions. So I think the fact that my books, I'm not saying I planned it, it's just that I'm also traditional and liberal at the same time. So my books reflect that. So I think the fact that my books were traditional and liberal is at the same time is why it really worked with young Indians, and why I find readers in the West also liking it. I think there's a sense among many Westerners today as well that perhaps they've gone too far in their attack on traditions. Liberalism is good. We do need liberalism, but you don't need to. It doesn't have to be a dichotomy that you can either be liberal or traditional. That you can't be both, because you do need both. You need the sense of rootedness that comes with traditions. You need liberalism to allow you to soar. Why can't you have both? And
Yeah.
Indian traditions are something which can provide both.
Yeah. So just to listeners that are not don't know the chant Har Har Mahadev, actually, in if this was Christianity, it would just say, "Hail the Lord Jesus Christ." Now, if you go on and launch a book and you have lots of youngsters that actually don't use those chants, and you said, "Hail the Lord Jesus Christ," you'd get no response. And I walked in there and I found you were saying Har Har Mahadev, and the most unexpected audience was chanting it right back at you. So tell me, when you were writing this book, were you aware, or this just happened in how you are? So if the question is, who are you? Amish, who are you? And knowing that you were a banker,
I was a banker, yes.
right?
I was a proper.
You were a banker that started right. My question is, who are you?
I think equally to answer that, one has to explain what Har Har Mahadev means. And then I will come to your answer. Because you're right, in some ways it can be interpreted as a religious slogan. But because Mahadev means the great God, the greatest God, which is Lord Shiva, the God of gods, right? But Har Har Mahadev means all of us are Mahadevs. Every single one of us is a Mahadev, which is why I find it very inspiring. And that was the slogan of Lord Shiva. That it's not just me who's a Mahadev, it's not just me who's a great God. Every single one of us is a great God. You are a great God, I'm a great God. And our journey is to discover that God within. So I find that a very inspiring. It's more spiritual than religious, if you ask me. You know, because our true journey is to discover the God within, which is why I find that chant very inspiring. Har Har Mahadev. All of us are gods. Um, in terms of me as a person, look, I'm as left-brained, and I was as stuck up as they come. I did my MBA from IIM Calcutta. As you know, it's there are the three traditional IIMs. IIM Ahmedabad, IIM Bangalore, IIM Calcutta are probably they're more difficult to get into than to many of the top B schools in the West. And for those of us who can't afford to go to pay the fees of Western business schools, we have to attempt these entrance exams in India. And so I did that. I did my MBA from IIM Calcutta, and I became a banker, just like you became a CA, Shekhar. Completely left-brained, and I'm, just like you went through. Even I was. I can't say I was excited about my job. It's just I didn't get up in the morning that yeah, I'm going to go work in a bank and save the world. I mean, obviously not. It's something that pays the bills, right? And there's no dishonor in that. If you come from a humble family, you get a job where your starting salary is more than the salary that your father retired at. I mean, lifestyle changes dramatically, right? And there's no dishonor in that. Yeah. But I can't say it's something that gave me pleasure or, or a sense of purpose. And
so, we are introducing your books, and you're incredible. You've been so productive. How many books have you written since then?
12 books in, no, sorry, 10 books. 10 books in 13 years. 2 more books are in the works right now. They'll release this year.
So let's say 12. Most great writers will have written in these 13 years 3 books, 4 books.
And my books are long. They're 400, 500 pages. A lot of research, a lot of philosophies. Yeah.
So let's talk about this. So when I said, who are you, is what provoked you? Who are you? Because did you just write from the heart, or did you say, oh, you couldn't have planned this, your first book?
Yeah.
If you wrote from the heart, what is Amish Tripathi's heart?
I come from a very humble family background. My grandfather was a pandit in Varanasi. As I'm sure even the viewers would know, is the ancient Indian holy city, perhaps the oldest living city in the world. And my grandfather was a priest at a temple out there, and he was a teacher also. He used to teach at Banaras Hindu University. He had very limited means, very, very, very limited means. He lost his mother at birth. He lost his father, I think, when he was a teenager. So he was practically an orphan. But he was a very, very smart kid, and he was educated thanks to the charity of Madan Mohan Malviya ji, who's the founder of Banaras Hindu University. Malviya ji used to have a program for talented children of all communities, to educate them. And one of the children who benefited from that was my grandfather. So we grew up in that, and he had 8 children, my grandfather. Those times families were big. 5 daughters, 3 sons. He educated every single one of them. And in those days, in India, sadly, women weren't educated, right? My eldest, aunt, she's 93 years old. She was a medical doctor. My grandfather sent her to medical college. In an entire 5 years of medical college, she was the only woman in there. Right? And his entire thing was that actually our ancient culture, because he had read the ancient scriptures, the ancient Hindu, Buddhist, Jain scriptures. He used to say our ancient scriptures actually say that education is supposed to be open for everyone, male, female, across all castes, across all communities. So his entire belief was educate everyone and your life improves. And we grew up in that kind of atmosphere, grew up in this atmosphere of an entire family, deep into our traditions, deep into our scriptures. So I grew up with all this knowledge. Then when I was in college, I turned into an atheist, by the way. I was an atheist for 10, 12 years. Virulently against, I would refuse to enter temples. I don't know what the hell I was trying to prove, but I can't say my parents were happy about it, but they didn't have a problem. They said that, everyone should have their own journey. And the traditional Indian way, nothing wrong with being an atheist. And my books kind of slowly brought me back to faith. In a way, that's who I am, that deep into our traditions, because I was born into it, deep into liberalism, because my family taught me that that is what our traditions are actually about. A deep exploration into atheism, and then a return back to this path. Maybe that journey has made me who I am.
Yeah. When people ask me why I left being a chartered accountant into filmmaking, I said I didn't go into filmmaking, I left chartered accountancy. Why? I said, because I needed at 24, I needed to go in. The biggest question to me was, who am I?
Yeah.
You through a chartered accountancy, I would never discover that. So the only thing was to throw myself into some kind of chaos, and maybe something would emerge from that chaos. But let's go back, because when I talk to my friends about you, most of them have heard about you, even in the West. You know, people that have no connection to India, I say, Amish Tripathi, they've heard about you somewhere. And when they say, "What?" I say you should read his books. They're really very, very good. And they say, "Well, why?" I don't talk about Hinduism. I don't talk about faith. I said the incredible story is incredibly well told. Now, to take a story, well, partly, yes, I know that our Hindu mythology is terrific stories also. The characters are always they are very mythic characters and represent myths that are still alive in all of us worldwide. But but what you've done is woven them into immensely readable, immensely understandable stories. So the first thing you've been able to do is to, I mean, most of your books, if Marvel could change the names, it could make films out of. Right? So that's what I would say. So tell me, how did you become so adept at storytelling? How? Or did you know what, I mean, how did you evolve that? It was there like very mythic, wonderful, plotted storytelling.
Let me, I will get to it and let me answer that through a counter question. How did you make, and Masoom was your first move, and you were a chartered accountant, and you know that Masoom is one of my favorite movies of all time, and you know how deeply attached I am to my son.
Yeah.
And I cry almost every time when I've seen it many times. And when he is on that holiday with his son, it brings those emotions out. And from what I know, you didn't have a child at that time. Uh, those weren't experiences that you had experienced, and yet you brought it out in such a deep and meaningful way that someone like me, who's a father who deeply misses his son, who loves him deeply, it brings tears to my eyes. How did the story flow for you? I think in that will have my answer as well.
So, no, my answer to that is I've never been able to make a film successfully unless I am every character in the film. So, like when I made Bandit Queen, it was about a woman raped. I actually needed to understand what a woman goes through in being raped. So, whether it was Elizabeth, I was Elizabeth when there were Elizabeth scenes. I was her lover, I was her enemy, I was her guru. So I just divided it into characters that I could find an affinity to, that I've gone through in my life, being part of that sometime. So every character that I deal with, I've had some kind of, I could take my own life and some experiences and extrapolate from there. So and if I've not done that, the film's not succeeded. It's only done that but again, the characters are me. I am the characters. Now, so that's my answer to you. So I'm asking you, and I think that's why I'm successful, is because I can't do anything that is not emotionally connected to me.
Spot on. Yeah. For me, that's the key thing, right? In some ways, I'm still a banker. Okay. During the marketing phase of my books, the contractual negotiation of my books, or other things, I do documentary hosting and all as well. On that side, I'm still that left brain IAM MBA. Why I love writing so much is because this is the only part where I can give full play to my emotions, right? Because in the real world, we are taught these days the way, there's this cult of rationality, right? That you should be rational, suppress your emotions. And we are taught to do that, right? And in a way, you miss feeling those emotions, just letting the emotions flow through you, experiencing the beauty and the pain that comes with the emotions. And for me, writing is in a way completely from the soul and from the heart. Which is why often when people ask me that where does it come from, I genuinely cannot explain where it comes from. My first book, Immortals of Melua, is the first piece of fiction I have ever written in my life. I'd written nothing before that, no short stories, nothing. I was always a voracious reader. I loved reading, right? But I was never creative. I was never a writer. And most of my school and college friends, today I've said this many times, they still, whenever they meet me, they still ask me, tell us the truth, who's actually written your books? Okay, because they refuse to believe that I've written it. Uh, and for me, as you were saying, the creative part of my life, it's almost spiritual. I love it so much because it's the only place where the emotions flow through me completely. I was weeping, desperately while writing it. And maybe that's why that saying is let the emotions flow. When we're doing creativity, one of the things I've learned, don't give in to this cult of rationality. That reason is above all. No, let the emotions flow. And then the story just, it comes to you. The ancient Greeks used to say that the muse is a goddess who exists outside of you. It's not your own inspiration. It's not your own genius. Your job is to help your muse, help the goddess to help you, which means just let it flow. Open yourself up. Just let it flow. That's how I write.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Raavan is one of the greatest characters that actually exists in all storytelling worldwide because he's both noble
Mm.
and yet evil.
Yeah.
You can't help hating him and you can't help admiring him in a way, which is quite fundamental to all the great opponent characters.
Mm. Mm.
Uh, so tell me, have you changed as a person? As a writer, of course, you keep evolving, and
Mm.
yeah. Have you changed as a person as you've been writing? Have you learned anything about yourself?
Very deeply. I've changed very deeply. Um, and I notice every book that I write, part of me goes into that book, and part of that book goes into me.
Hmm.
Uh, and the Shiva trilogy was written at a time when my personal life was a lot better. Um, and there was pain. I'd lost someone very dear to me, my father-in-law, my ex-wife's father, who I loved almost like my own father. Um, but that was the only real tragedy. Otherwise, the life was broadly okay. From the Ramchandra series, as you know, you're a friend. I mean, I've passed through a series of very painful uh, personal life tragedies. I've lost, too many people. Some of them very tragically. Uh, uh, Marriage, broke down. Various things. And the only thing that used to keep me sane and together were actually my books. Um, and You told me this, because I remember I was speaking to you at my lowest phase in my personal life, because bizarrely the career was going better and better, but the personal life was just, I was almost tired, exhausted after some time. Like I can't take anymore, right? And I remember we were speaking at that time, and I told you that I, you know, because I was very angry because I was speaking to another creative person, and he just said, pain is good; it brings the best out of an artist. And I'd actually lost my temper. Like, are you serious? No one really wants this shit, man. And I remember I'd spoken to you, and you'd said, look, grief is a part of life. What really screws you is paralysis. Uh, Grief and joy are a part of life. You have to experience what there is to experience. But if you get paralyzed, that's when things just start breaking down. So you just have to keep moving, keep moving, keep moving, keep walking. Uh, and this was, and my lowest phase is when I wrote Raavan, actually, which is 2018. Raavan released in 2019. Yeah, that was actually my fastest selling book ever. Uh, and in some ways, a lot of I was actually just very angry with life. A lot of that went into the book. But the bizarre thing, there's this belief that it can be cathartic, for you putting it all out in a book. No, actually, because a lot of the book went into me as well, and I was even more of a spiral, right? And then
And
when I
Raavan,
came to,
I
yeah,
just wanted to say, Raavan it portrays that. It does that to me as a reader. It also spirals me into Raavan's head, which is why it's such an amazing book, because everything that you just said
mm,
is there in the way Raavan behaves, in the way he thinks. It's all there. It's all there. That's what makes that book so incredible.
yeah, but the entire thing you realize is because Ravan's entire attitude is the world hurt me, I will freaking burn the world down. That's and that sounds like cathartic, but actually it pulls you deeper into more chaos, right?
Yeah.
Uh, which is why when I came to which is why frankly I wanted to get out of India. I was not in a good frame of mind, and when I came to London, I just wanted to be alone. Um, and uh, and that's when I started writing War of Lanka and a few other books, because Ravan had actually, as you said, actually it wasn't necessarily cathartic. Putting all that pain and anger into a book, the book actually reflected more anger back into me.
I mean, you talked a lot about chaos and pain, and how the pain and chaos of your life reflected in the books, and the books reflected it back. Um, do you think, are you afraid of the chaos leaving you anytime? Are you afraid? You talked about love. Do you think that is the pain and the chaos and you've caused it because who you are also? Or is it that, you want to come back to a point where there's very little chaos and not that much pain? If that happens, are you scared that you might just lose the will and the creativity of creating these incredible novels that you have? And I'm sure this is with a lot of writers, there are a lot of writers who sometimes say, well, I just don't have it anymore because I don't feel it anymore.
Mm.
Do you feel that might happen?
There are kind of two fears that I live with, because one on my creativity, one on my relationships. Uh, Nothing else really matters. Everything else can be managed, right? And because I can't explain where the books come from, even now, even after having written 10 books and two more to come out soon, I still can't explain where it comes from. It just comes. Uh, and if you can't explain it, if there's no logical process that you are doing, like in a banking world, you almost feel like it's a blessing. And when the blessing will stop, God knows when. And then what will I do? Because this is so much a deep part of my life. But what that does is puts me into this frame of mind that I till it's flowing, let me just get as many books out as I can, because I don't know when it'll flow, when it'll stop. So essentially, don't waste the purple patch. It's one of the things I've seen with creative people. They waste their purple patch when everything in their creativity is flowing. They waste it in parties and uh, unnecessary shit. We all know what that unnecessary shit is, rather than getting more of your creativity out,
Yeah.
before
Well,
it stops. And
yeah, in my
second
business,
thing, sorry,
shit is the politics of filmmaking. And
yeah,
sometimes I feel like you're lucky. On the
yeah,
other hand, I have a fundamental fear of loneliness. The idea that writing is a very lonely job because you have to fall in love with your piece of paper and the characters you're creating.
uh,
I just have to fall in love with all my actors and writers and things, and I walk onto the set, and the set and the actors make me, give me a lot of, give me all my creativity and a lot of charge. So I wish I was a writer sometimes. And when I see
uh,
you and all the questions I've asked you, most of them are, how do you discipline yourself to
uh,
write? So let's hold that question. How do you discipline your, because I know that the answer to you would be, well, it just comes and I have to write. But
uh,
that's one question which you'll have to explain. The other thing that I'm going to ask you is that you deal with something that India is so sensitive about.
Hmm.
The whole diaspora in India, all us Hindus and all of those, we feel that it's precise, right? And you talk about being reasonable and unreasonable, as you just said. The greatest stories in the world are completely unreasonable,
Hmm.
right? And so between reason and unreasonableness, and between the purity that people expect in the presentation of all the characters that you deal with, because there are mythic characters for all the Indian spiritualists and for Indian minds. But you do play with them.
Hmm.
You do reinterpret, because you have to. I've seen you reinterpret characters, and yet I've never seen anybody come at you and saying, burn him down, burn his house down, shoot him. It's never happened. So you need to talk to me a little bit about how you managed to take something, like, can I create, if somebody said, okay, reinterpret the Bible,
Hmm.
I'd be dead, or the Quran, I'd be dead. But you do it all the time.
Hmm.
You do it all the time. So I need to understand from you how you manage that without having people burn your house down. That's not
Okay. So let me. So there are two questions in that. The first part is writing, and yeah, you're right. The writing is in a way a lonely profession as compared to filmmaking, documentary, and I host documentaries as well, which are essentially team efforts. And there's the politics in that which inevitably comes in. Luckily for me, Shekhar, I am frankly a bit of a loner, right? In India, I did really go to parties. You don't find pictures of me at parties because I didn't go to any of those parties. If I went to literature festivals, I would normally just go for my event and leave. I won't really hang around for all the 4 or 5 days. I am a bit of a loner. Now, a loner doesn't mean that you're completely by yourself. It just means that your social circle is very small, right? Just your family and very close friends. Which is where the fear comes in, because if you're so dependent on your family and very close friends, if you lose one or two of them, or any of them as I have, it really just buggers your mind and your emotions. And that's the second fear, that I was, in the previous question, the fear of the loss of creativity. And second is the fear of loss of the people I love, because I've experienced it. So there's this fear of, I don't want to lose anymore, right? Uh, I don't think I can handle it. That's answers that first part, because then naturally I want to kind of just stay with my family, close friends, keep writing, naturally just go into that. Presently I have a diplomatic job, which means I'm forced to socialize a lot more, but it's a job. But otherwise, in India I never really did that. And when I go back to India at the end of this, I'll go back to that. In terms of writing stuff which doesn't generate controversies, I don't think it's special about me. I think it's special about India. I think Indian culture, particularly, the ancient Indian culture, the way Hindu, Buddhist, Jain uh, thoughts have been conceptualized, there is a lot of openness to different interpretations, which is why these ways of life are more, they're called a way of life because they're more spiritual than religious. Uh, there is no concept that you have to follow this one truth. There's no concept of blasphemy in Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, in the ancient way. As long as you present something with respect, no one minds it. I mean, and the proof of the pudding is in the eating. I've been writing these books for 12 years. My books aren't really secrets, the Shiva trilogy, from what I've been told by my publisher, is the fastest selling ever in publishing history. And the Ramchandra series, my second series, is the second fastest selling ever. But and someone can Google me, they won't find any controversy around me. I think if you write with respect, there is no real controversy that happens in India, and I do write with respect. I mean, I might have a different interpretation, but I write with respect, and I think this is in India. This is not just true of the way Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism is practiced out there. It's also true of the way Islam and Christianity are practiced in India. Only an Indian poet could have said something so beautiful as "Ya to masjid mein sharab peene de saki, ya aisi jagah bata jahan khuda na ho." And those of you who don't know Urdu or Hindi, Google this and find the beauty. And this was written by an Indian poet. And it shows the liberalism with which Islam and Christianity are also practiced in India. And that, I think, is something that Indians can teach to the rest of the
I just wanted, so for the listeners who was being sees that whether that either let me drink in a mosque, in a temple, or a place of worship, or tell me where God does not exist, and I'll go drinking.
Yeah. And so beautifully, and this to me shows Indian, India can teach this to the world, that you can be religious and liberal at the same time. The two are not necessarily in conflict. And this is a good lesson to learn in today's day.
Yeah, okay. And how long do you think you're going to go on? I mean, how many stories? You see, when people ask me about you and I say, I don't talk so much about Indian religion. I'm saying that this is not something that you should read to understand who we are in India. You will get an inkling, but these are the great mythic stories because they were not ever written or conceived. Those characters existed as great stories from which you need to interpret your own life. And so, but what I just wanted to say this out loud, that despite all the conversations we have here, if you read a book by Amish Tripathi, you're reading a very good story that you will probably find very difficult to put down. So where do you go from here? I mean, you've written 14 books. You created, in fact, you've often told me, you said you are creating a universe, an Amish Tripathi universe, using Indian mythology as a very base. Do you think that we'll see movies out of your books soon?
Yeah, and we're planning a musical with you as well, hopefully on West End and Broadway, on Raavan. So there are many, ideas that one has. You're right. My books are all interconnected. Actually, the Shiva trilogy was set in 1900 BCE. The Ramchandra series, which is the fourth book of which I just released, War of Lanka, is actually set in 3400 BCE. So it can be seen as a prequel to the events of the Shiva trilogy, and they're all linked. I've left clues in the Shiva trilogy, which are tied up in books of the Ramchandra series, which released many years later. It's building an interconnected universe. London has been inspiring for me too. I've got a story idea out here, which is set in the modern day. It's a very different genre from what I've written. It has elements of time travel, gaming, and set in the modern day. So very, very different space, getting out of my comfort zone a bit. I'm trying to impress my son, my 14-year-old son, Neil. He loves fantasy. And, and he told me that I'm his second favorite author, not his favorite. He said, "You're a very close number 2, Dad, but you're not number 1 because you don't have fantasy. It's all like historical fiction." So I need to impress him. So this new series will probably, it'll bring in much more elements of fantasy. I am hosting documentaries as well, as you know, in India on Discovery TV. One can do things abroad as well, and hopefully, and the project I'm most excited about right now is to work with you, Shekhar, on the musical on Raavan. Really looking forward to it. I think
I'll say something about it. When I started to think about what could we say as a one line on Raavan to get people to think, oh, that's an interesting character, mythic character is. And then I said, yeah, here's a man that fought to be immortal, have everything in his life, and now does not know how to be mortal. And the big thing is he wants to be immortal, but he's taken the boon of immortality, does not know how to get rid of it. because immortality has become his biggest burden now. And then I thought, oh, that could be Greek, of Greek mythology. And what a conflict! What an amazing conflict! I'm immortal. I don't want to be, although I fought for it all my life. It's such a great conflict. Yeah, that's what really drives me. And but that was Raavan's story also, which is very prevalent. I picked it up from your book. Yeah, so interesting. So let's just talk about the novel you're writing, because that will I would just look at your mind there. Tell us a little bit, give us a little teaser on what it's going to be about.
So, War of Lanka just released. War of Lanka is the fourth of the Ramchandra series. And Ramchandra series is my interpretation of the Ramayana. So, those of you who don't know Indian traditions, I'm sure many of you would know the festival of Diwali, the festival of lights, when good won over evil. Well, this is the story of what led up to the first Diwali. The Ramayana is what led up to the first Diwali. And there are three main characters in this story. My interpretation of the Ramayana. The first is, of course, Lord Ram, the god. And my first book in the Ramchandra series, Ram Sayana Vikshwaku, is from Lord Ram's birth to when his wife, goddess Sita, is kidnapped. The second book, Sita, Warrior of Mithila, is on the second important character, which is goddess Sita.
I have to stop you there.
Sorry.
Sita, the warrior of Mithila. Now, tell me. Every tradition that we've ever come across in India, or perceived to come across, I know it's not true, is that the woman is the quiet one, the dominated one. She gives into everything. She's a nurturing one, but at the same time, the shy one. And you call that book A Warrior of Mithila. And you talk about Sita, one of the most revered female forms of female ideas in all of Indian mythology. Tell me that.
Yeah, you're right. In modern India, goddess Sita is often seen as docile and submissive, and but this is largely based on a television serial that released in the 1980s. And that television serial of the 1980s was based on a version of the Ramayana that was written 400 years ago, right, in the 16th century. 16th century sounds very far back for most cultures. By Indian standards, it's relatively recent. Okay. If you see the ancient interpretations of the Ramayana, goddess Sita is not shown as docile or submissive. She is, of course, nurturing. She is a mother, but she's very tough. In the Indian way, actually, the most aggressive often used to be the goddesses, right? The most powerful. And there are versions of the Ramayana, like the Adbhut Ramayana, where Raavan, the quote-unquote chief villain, was actually killed by goddess Sita, not by the god Lord Ram, but by goddess Sita. So, I know Sita Warrior Mithila is particularly popular with many women in India. And I've had many women come and tell me, thank you for interpreting this, and it's a feminist take, and I'd love to take credit for it, but actually it's not me. I've just gone back to what our ancient traditions were, where goddesses were shown in a very powerful light. In fact, in ancient India, we had women who wrote scriptures. So we had the equivalent of women prophets and messiahs. We had women who founded universities. We had women who ruled in their own name, not as like the daughter of a king or the wife of a king. No, they ruled in their own name, right? They would lead their armies into battle. This is actual history. This is what ancient India was like. So actually portraying goddess Sita as a warrior was not in any way un-Indian. In fact, it was truly Indian, truly following ancient Indian traditions. And this was the second book, Sita, Warrior of Mithila. The third book was, of course, Raavan, Enemy of Aryavarta, the quote-unquote chief villain, from his birth to the time he kidnaps goddess Sita. And then the fourth book, War of Lanka, which just released, is with all three narratives merging together starts with the kidnapping of goddess Sita, and then going onwards on the War of Lanka to the death of Raavan, where Lord Ram defeats him. And when the royal couple, they go back to Ayodhya and the first Diwali is celebrated. So in a way, the first three books, it's a bit like Rashomon, Kurosawa's fantastic movie. You get an insight into the story from the three different characters. You get a deeper understanding of why they do what they do. Then armed with this understanding, you understand War of Lanka a lot better, which is the fourth book, where all the narratives merge.
Last question. This book that you're going to be writing to impress your son, Neil. Right? Give us a hint of what, in the fantasy land, what is Amish Tripathi, who's always written as an interpretation or of great Indian mythology. What's it do in the fantasy land? So all your characters are gone.
This is set in the modern day, right? In London, actually. And with Indian characters and native British characters. And it's of course, it's a fast-paced story, like all my books are, but it's built on an interpretation of time. The way the Western interpretation of time is that it's linear. That there was a beginning, God said, let there be light, time began, it's moving in a line like this, and then it ends with Judgment Day. So time is essentially linear. And if you put time travel with this kind of time structure, the classic story of that is Back to the Future, right? You go back in one line, you change the past, and it goes into another, parallel line, right? Because this is how time is supposed to move. And this actually conforms to the Western paradigm of time, right? That it's linear. The ancient Indian way of looking at time was actually very different. It wasn't linear. It was actually kind of more like a spiral, and many different strands could touch each other and move out. And there's this text called the Bhagavad Puran, where ancient Indian theories on time are listed. We are the only ancient culture which saw time in billions of years, by the way. Ancient Greeks, ancient Israelites, etc., didn't see time in that long a distance. They saw it in a few thousand years. It's only in the modern day that time is seen in billions of years. But among the ancient cultures, India was the only one which saw time stretching billions of years. And we had a very complex theory of time. So I'm basing my concept of time travel on this. If you can imagine different strands of time which can go in spirals, which connect with each other, and if you're traveling through this, how freaking complicated it would be, and what great fun you can have with the story. That's how it is. So it is time travel and gaming. Yeah. I think my son Neil will hopefully be impressed. And maybe I'll finally become his favorite author.
Yeah. Well, good luck with that. Yeah. And great. It was great talking to you. So much insight. So much insight. It was incredible.
I appreciate it. Pleasure talking to you as always. You bring the best out. You are a wonderful director. Always.
Oh, thanks. Thank you.